there. This is not the Monday panel on a Tuesday of all things. Hope you had a good bank holiday weekend. We are joined by Mr. Dion Fanning once again of the Free State Podcast. You're very welcome.
Hi, Joe.
Michael Verney, GA coverage to the fore.
How are you, Joe?
This weekend, Michael, hello. And Dan McDonnell, our football correspondent, also with us. Hello.
Hi.
On the panel.
Yeah. Oof. It's great to be here, Joe.
Well, good news, Dan. We're starting with Graham Rowntree. No.
Oh, lovely.
We're not, but just to mention Graham Rowntree. Very dramatic news this morning, unexpected. This does not tend to happen in Irish rugby all that often. 6 games into a season in what would have been his third year as a head coach. He has parted ways with Munster. There's talk of mutual consent. So on the back of Ten Hag yesterday, it's Rowntree today. It comes in threes. So this panel is not rugby country. However, we will be talking to Cian Tracy in due course this afternoon about just what has happened there. Because, like I said, all very dramatic. Erik Ten Hag, fellas. He's still dominating, or more so Manchester United are. Ruben Amorim is now very much in talks, it seems, to become the next Manchester United manager. He's 39 years of age. He's the next bright young thing in management. He's a manager at Sporting. Broke the dominance of Benfica and Porto back in 21. He ended the club's 19-year title drought. And so there's a release clause of somewhere between 10 and 20 million, depending on what you're reading, and United are willing to pay it. So that seems to be where that's all going. On Erik Ten Hag, Dion, you sent on what was just a thoroughly entertaining, if also cringe-inducing article in the Manchester Evening News, where Samuel Luckhurst has given us a little peek behind the Manchester United dressing room. And to say it's dysfunctional is an understatement. So, for instance, I'll give you some headlines I had jotted down. One player became so resentful of Ten Hag that his relative told a confidant, "We won't be bailing him out again this year." This was a month into last season. Ten Hag had to go, says the piece at one stage. But the dressing room bitching was rife. That was rife under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and Ralph Rangnick continues. Effing Ronaldo wannabe is how a Manchester United player hanger-on described Garnacho. There was a member of one player's entourage. The entourage here are to the fore. I mean, they are just horrific. So a member of one player's entourage, who I'm presuming that's where a lot of journalists they'd be key sources. So he took exception to criticism and bragged, "Don't worry, this is the entourage, we have plenty of notes to dry our tears." Samuel Luckhurst writes that some United players have never taken to Anthony. One was dismayed by his behaviour towards staff in the canteen. A United player admitted some squad members were reluctant to pass the ball to Hoyland. Doesn't say why, but reluctant to pass to him. Then there was Jadon Sancho, of course. He gained little sympathy over accusing Ten Hag of lying. A number of teammates had become frustrated with his lack of urgency on the ball. One teammate bluntly described the winger as slow as shit. And some senior teammates advised Sancho to apologise to Ten Hag, and he never did. Rashford then, he remains a mystery after this piece, but you get some more details, I suppose. Start of last season, in September, Rashford dismayed to start the season as a centre forward after a career best campaign on the left wing, and his goals output went from 30 the season before to 8 last season. And one opposition player said of Rashford in this piece, "It must be frustrating for United fans to watch Rashford because honestly, if he wanted to, he could have destroyed us, but he chose not to be in the game." And then last one, as recently as this season, an opposition manager got wind of Ten Hag's tactical alterations after he was tipped off by one of the Manchester United players. The player was an international teammate of one of the United players who told him where he'd be playing and what the plan was hours before kickoff. And on it goes. It's gloriously dysfunctional. It's unmanageable.
Well, it's also very repetitive in that these pieces, David Moyes, the David Moyes exit was accompanied by very, very similar pieces. Van Gaal, a genuine coaching great. When he left Manchester United, okay, there was lots of problems with the way Van Gaal was playing, but again, it was accompanied by this sort of barrage of leaks and entourages making clear how boring it was or how uninterested players were in things he wanted to do. And it's just that sense of Manchester United being kind of uncontrollable, and that anything Jim Ratcliffe has done since he's come in he's done nothing to address the key issues. And like you look at Amorim and you think, well, Amorim was available in the summer too, when they decided to stick with Ten Hag. So what has happened? We don't really we don't know nothing has happened. Nobody thought Ten Hag was going to turn it around. Nobody thought it was going to get any better, and yet they're into November. They missed the international window. Everything, they lost Tuchel. All these opportunities seem to be missed, and whether it is interesting who is actually going to take it and who is going to get the opportunity, even with that new. Like I used the phrase before, the Politburo of bullshit. Like that phrase, that team of football directors, Dan Ashworth, Jason Wilcox, all these people, all those people who are there to supposedly bring the wisdom of crowds, bring some, Dave Brailsford, all that high performance bullshit that he's going to bring. It still hasn't. Like, will it make any difference? Will that dysfunction that seems to be at the heart of it, and it seems to be driven by players who know they'll see out another manager, that hasn't changed.
Yeah. Dan, I think tedium best describes your attitude to these professionals.
Well, I think Dion sums it up well in that it feels like we've heard it before. And that's the thing, you read out that stuff there, and part of me is torn between that's entertaining and that's boring. Like, I don't know which one it is, because it's just like, oh, well, here we go, because I just feel like we've, like,
My favourite days of journalism are the 2 to 3 days after a big signing.
But
it's great stuff. Come on.
The clock is ticking on all of us here, and we're going to look back and think about all the time we spoke about the Manchester United era. Over the last 4 or 5 years, there is a part of me that every time it comes up, Manchester United, it's like, well, it's the greatest hits again of the players are on big contracts, they can't get rid of them. The manager, he hasn't won them over. Well, actually, the structures post Ferguson were, a joke, and you can go around. It's the greatest hits of this, and it's like,
you prefer the variety of Irish football discussions?
I prefer the slight variety. But even, I know we've been talking about it the last couple. Weirdly, I feel guilty for being entertained by Chelsea now. I actually find myself watching Chelsea and looking forward to watching Chelsea, even though the sort of extreme dysfunction behind the scenes there in the last couple of years. And I know what Dion is saying about the sort of the various people that they have lined up, and Dan Ashworth and people. But if we've learned anything from the Chelsea scenario, is that they probably will eventually get it right. Like, they will eventually get there. They obviously have a lot of these. Now they've recruited very badly under Ten Hag again, but I'm not sure if they're going to have the same legacy contracts that have been hanging over the last couple of years. And presumably, like, some of those people, Dan Ashworth, are quite capable. I think eventually they probably will start to recruit a little bit smarter, and they'll probably get there, even though all the stuff about Inios and I know a couple of people who go there regularly, in the corporate box circuit, and they're talking about there's less programs and the staff. It's all a little bit, they're trying to tighten things, but still, like, they'll still get there.
But that is actually one of the fascinations about Manchester United today, that, like, they should still be there. Like, this is the extraordinary thing. Nobody, like, they are an extraordinary sample in that nobody spends the money Manchester United does for the return that they've got. Like, this is an outlier in terms of modern professional sport. That you can spend another 200 million this summer, and they're 14th in the Premier League. Like
the HSE of world football.
They'll spend it, but I think they'll spend it again. Like, Chelsea spent $1 billion, and now they don't have a single player over the age of 26, 27, and it'll be fine. Like,
well, maybe
it will be.
Yeah,
They will be fine.
But this is the thing. That's what it's always been based on. That they will spend enough money, and it will be fine. And yet, I think there is something happening at the moment, and clearly it won't be, because, like, maybe it is the recruitment, but and there's players you can look at like Anthony, who clearly are terrible signings, but also there's something happens. So all these players can't be as bad as that. The dysfunction that's at the core of United, between the lack of harmony between coaches and management, or coaches and players, and the executive, the entire thing seems to be a sort of created in a way to make sure that no matter how much money you spend, it disappears into a black hole, because this is really kind of extraordinary stuff for modern football.
Yeah.
And Dan's right. Like they should get it right. But then again, you kind of, and I think there's part of us then as well that wants Manchester United to get it right the way Alex Ferguson got it right, rather than it being a Chelsea. Because you kind of look at Manchester United and you look at the tradition of what they should be and what they were under Ferguson and going back, and you think that's what we want. We want the great manager coming in. We want Alex Ferguson coming down from Aberdeen, getting hold of these people and saying, right, I'm going to, I'm coming around to your parties. I'm sending everyone home.
Done with kind of talent and hard work as opposed to wastage, but endless resources.
Yeah, which is probably, as Dan says, it's probably the reality of how it's going to ultimately.
They will get there. I think that's the thing is, right, and this is where I get probably worn down a bit. Like, that clearly, right, there's an element of crisis mode and. Yes, and like this is the sort of unsavoury aspect of it. Like, a lot of like regular staff have had their jobs cut, across the summer, and you're sort of listening to the Ten Hag thing. Take 13 million to sort them and whatever. And it's not that whole line of they're fine. They get loads of money at the top end of the game, but there is a simple truth. Like, what is the implications for their failures here? Like, it is still one of the most marketable, successful, popular clubs in the world, who will always have a seat around the table when you're talking about discussions of, people want them in the big competitions. UEFA want them in the big competitions. Like, it feels like, yes, they're hitting a version of rock bottom because it's disappointing that they're losing games at the moment. But inevitably they will just spend more money and they will get back there. I don't see any other. I know what you're saying. Maybe it's going to take longer, but they probably have appointed some capable people in the last 12 months behind the scenes that will mean that they probably will in time get there. And
would you agree with that, Dion? The soundings around Dan Ashworth are very strong from multiple people in the game, and his track record is good. And to be fair to Ineos, they made a mess of the summer in talking to all of these managers so publicly. I mean, they fatally undermined a manager they should have just sacked in the first place. So it was a complete mishmash over the summer. But you allow for that. You give Ashworth his head over the coming seasons. They'll recruit better. They can't keep hiring bad managers. I mean, I think Ten Hag was found out a little bit, is the brutal truth. But Amorim seems to be the real deal. And if he's not, they'll get somebody else. I would think in the next 2 to 3, 4 years, though, Ineos will get this right. This is not the Glazers anymore. This may well be just the rock bottom kind of moment for them.
But again, in that versions of when Dan says they will get it right, I'm sitting here nodding, going, yeah, of course they will. But then again,
in your lifetime,
5 years ago, we would have been saying the same thing. Maybe not, and you've been told, well, look, they've got John Omerta in and Darren Fletcher. Like, he's got all his experience and he knows, and there's various people in there. Ed Woodward is finally learning to, delegate.
Yeah. But that never felt as convincing.
Gary Neville at the start of every season seems confident, and various, like the Manchester United sort of fanzine sort of representatives who are around there. At the start of every season, it feels like this is going to be their year.
This is different.
Ed
Woodward learning.
Different. I don't think it's like, Dan Ashworth, that's like, people say about he's got a good track record. That stuff, again, that isn't transferable all the time. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, was his Newcastle record was fine. Like, how many people are you looking at Newcastle going, wow, that was, there's an awful lot of talent there. You're gonna want to kind of take from Newcastle.
I think the thing about Newcastle, maybe they had the influx of wealth and they probably haven't spent crazy money there.
But then that's what you expect Ashworth then to be kind of really, oh my God, these players have tripled, quadrupled in value because Dan Ashworth is a genius. No, all I'm saying is that there is a lot of that stuff, Jason Wilcox, Dave Brailsford. Like, sorry, I keep coming back to Dave Brailsford.
I'll give you that one.
This is a spoofer. Above all the rest of them.
A spoofer who achieved a lot, though.
No, he didn't. He's a spoofer. He's an absolute spoofer.
Well, but sorry. You can't look at Team Sky and there are some issues. I appreciate. Team Sky.
Well, let's look at the issues rather than the kind of marginal gains.
Some of those issues may well have been across the board, and therefore, in a perverse way, it was almost a level playing field.
Like, we had to read stuff about the quality of the cotton in their pillows.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
that was a marketing exercise.
Well, but that's what it was built on. And like, again...
But it can't just have been built with that if the results were there as well. To be fair now, I'm not saying I love Dave Brailsford, but he's not here to defend himself. You can't just dismiss his record totally. He achieved some things.
I think he's a marketing genius. And I think I would say football compared to cycling, I would say football gets a very bad rap because of the money that's in it, and the tendency in clubs like Manchester United to throw money at a problem. But there's also an awful lot of smart people working there. There's a lot of people doing things in a smart way that Brailsford is, which is in a far more competitive field than cycling. A far more competitive field, which he also had a huge amount of money to throw at. He had a huge advantage financially.
Yeah.
So
look.
You're
not buying it, okay?
I'm not buying him. I'm not buying Ratcliffe.
You're shooting down Ashworth.
One thing I'll say,
shooting down Brailsford. Wilcox, who's he?
No, I'm just saying.
They've done good things.
Is that I would not be any more confident of the organisation in place today getting it right. Okay, with the exception of the Glazer element, and the exception, it has to be said, of deciding to end the incredible, which I wasn't aware of, the incredible contract of Alex Ferguson to get $2 million a year to sit in the stand, being the person that they always cut to when a result went the wrong way. You know what I mean? That's an extraordinary, and like again, the idea that was allowed persist for so many years, that Ferguson, right? You're an ambassador. We'll have you here at every game. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer will surrender his car park space to you. All that kind of stuff. When clearly they needed a clean break. I'll give Ratcliffe credit for that. But everything else about Ratcliffe, to me, points to like the way he tried to kind of hustle up public money for a new stadium. The way everything about him, to me, just speaks of somebody. Between Brailsford, Ashford and Wilcox, I'd be more open to.
Barada seems to be highly rated as well.
Barada seems to be highly rated for doing, what did he do at Manchester City?
What's TBC?
Manchester, like again, I wouldn't. I don't necessarily saying that these are the people that you'd look at and go, fantastic brains trust they have here now.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to it. I suspect Damien Delaney is going to join us tomorrow. We'll talk to him about all that. And
Can I just ask quickly, Joe, when are they going to start putting solid characters into the dressing room? And characters that don't bring these massive entourages with them. And don't get me wrong, leaks are great for journalists.
Interestingly, the piece, Samuel Luckhurst's piece, did say about 3/4 of the way through what was an exceptionally long piece with one horrific example after another. He said, good eggs still outnumber the rotten apples in the dressing room. But didn't elaborate on the percentage. But it felt pretty.
Name names.
It felt weighty.
Say good eggs.
Harry Maguire, good egg.
Good egg. Rotten apples. I'm not saying you name names. I just want these pieces. Dan is right. Like we've got an awful lot of these pieces now. We need them to take. And I thought in that Luckhurst piece, at one point he mentions he was getting incoherent emails from a relative. Print the email. Like if there's an email, the lawyers will let that go.
We just need a new Manchester United story at this stage.
Yeah, but
it's just like how many times you're going to have a Monday here. It's like Manchester United at the weekend. Oh God, what happened? What's happened now? And what's come out of the camp? And I know what Verney is saying. Like, I mean, the thing is, do they have the worst characters in their dressing room, or do they just have the leakiest dressing room? As in, there could be terrible characters in lots of other dressing rooms, but it's just there's a lot more of a tighter ship and an operation around it. I think both of those things could nearly be true, and that's why I think if you actually could somehow find a manager who had the ability to get something going, I feel like it can turn quicker than you might think, purely because they might let load of the lower paid staff go, but there's no implications really for their failure. Like they're still going to have the cash to be around these terrible years. They've still certain years of finishing the top 3 and won cups and being around the business end. It doesn't take a huge amount to get back involved.
Yeah.
But Chelsea the old Chelsea is a good example too, in the sense that Chelsea seemed to survive by turning, they could go through managers and having a core of players who had a direct line to the executive, and that was they were the important relationships, and the managers were kind of incidental and just didn't, sometimes they stayed a bit longer, sometimes they didn't, but the key players was the dressing room and the kind of senior executives, and that allowed a club. So
it did. Mourinho built such a strong dressing room there; it effectively ran itself.
Yeah.
his absence for a good 6-7 years afterwards. We'll move on. I mean, so we'll talk to Damien Delaney, like I said, tomorrow about all that, about the Ballon d'Or and a few other things. And we'll talk to Ruth Fahey as well about Ireland's match against Georgia this evening, which is something of a formality. Davy Russell was interviewed by Paul Kimmage on Sunday. Really interesting conversation. There is obviously, Paul has obviously been asking big questions of racing in the last couple of years. And so it would have been very easy for Davy Russell, I think, to shy away and dodge the interview. He's under no obligation to do it. I think the sport should at least talk to its critics, and he did that in fairness to him. There was an exchange I wanted to get your thoughts on. Dan is a big racing fan. Michael's a big racing fan. I think you've both had ownership in horses. Michael currently.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Great buzz.
Previously for me, yeah.
Previously for you.
I tried to get you in, Dan, but you turned me back.
That'd be the previous experiences.
The Barrio experience.
Well, Barrio was one of the happier ones.
Okay.
But
Well, you've had more than one horse.
I've been involved in, I'd say, double figures at this stage, yeah.
And do you mind me asking, how much would you invest in a horse on an average?
Well, see, Barrio was one of the more expensive purchases.
Go on.
That was a Celtic Tiger moment.
So how much?
Well, oh God, I'm trying to figure out who's going to be listening to this. What did I tell them at the time?
The statute of limitation is gone, Dan.
To refer to some previous emails. Well, like Barrio definitely cost more than €20,000, and there was a small number of us in the syndicate.
How many?
Jeez, you're really
4 to
fishing for
6,
the exact
4 to
figure here,
6,
Joe.
4 to 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
which might have been what I spent up front, but then it's the training fees.
how much
Barrio was the first horse
How much
I
are
was
training?
involved
How much
in.
are training fees?
It depends on the trainer. And I think I have been involved in the last couple of years, but it can be anything to maybe, I don't know, 1,200 to 1,500 a month.
1,200 is a fair.
And look, if it's been to the track, for example, you might have like travel for that and various other costs you will inherit. But Barrio was the first horse I involved in who, as we've spoken with this off air, who, like, this was 2008, ran for us like 6 times, 4, 5, 6 times, disappeared. Who knows? And then a couple of years ago, I got an email from the owner of Barrio in the UK who said, like, I just assumed Barrio had gone to a place, who knows where Barrio had gone, and is still alive in his 20s as a show horse. It's mad.
Yeah.
But I've been involved in another one since. Who were ironically enough, I was involved in one that won a couple of times. That was probably the cheapest one I got involved in.
Okay.
And that was successful. So no, I love the game. I will get back into it.
Right.
But it's that's the type of money you're talking. I find the flat game now is cheaper to get involved in. I don't know what are you involved in a national hunt horse?
Both actually at the minute, yeah.
Yeah, like the flat, you can probably buy a horse for cheaper that can be probably more durable and run. National hunt is more of a long-term project, which, I mean, it can be expensive up front now, but also
Well, even
you
training
have to wait a
fees.
long time for them to come to the track necessarily, and a lot can go wrong. Like I was involved in one horse that basically ran once and got injured, and that was it. And you're waiting a year for that run, and then that's it.
Well, even training fees at $1,200 a month is
Yeah.
no joke,
Yeah.
So at one stage, Paul quotes a Dennis Walsh piece in the Irish Times, which Dennis had written maybe 2 years ago or so. And he was just in that piece bemoaning, I suppose, a culture of cheating. And he does wonder, is cheating the right word? And he decides, do you know what it is? Which is almost inherent in the sport. Attempting to cheat the system is institutionalised in the game, says Dennis Walsh in this piece. Under the rules of racing, every horse is obliged to, quote, run on its merits to, quote, obtain the best possible finishing position, end quote. He says racing's relationship with dishonesty is an outcome of how the game is played. So to give you a sense of the exchange between Paul and Davy Russell, which is on the website if you're interested, he says, jockeys and cyclists have a lot in common. We're formed by this beautiful yet brutal sport that's underpinned by an omerta. The basic dishonesty that runs through racing, he puts to Davy Russell. Davy says, and this is a fair defence initially, he says, when you're riding horses, especially this time of year, when they're having their first run, you have to mind them. You can't gun them. You have to nurse them to a degree. Look, the whole point of the dishonesty thing is the betting. The betting is the issue. Paul says, well, now we're talking. You accept that it happens. Davy Russell says, I accept it can happen, but it's not premeditated. That's kind of a strange way of putting it. I would thought by definition it'd have to be premeditated, but he says, I accept it can happen, but it's not premeditated. And Paul Kimmage then shows him Barry Brogan's book. He was a top national hunt jockey in the 70s. And the book has kind of examples and anecdotes of horses being held back in races. So, for instance, He talks about hearing things like, the owner's in Barbados, he'll be back for Doncaster, he likes a bet, try not to be in the first 3 today if you can, but don't get yourself in trouble. Or advice like, if you shout like hell at him going down the back straight, he'll stop 10 yards. And Davy Russell says, that sounds fictional to me. And he concludes at one point by saying, all I can tell you is my own experience, and anything I've experienced has been good and enjoyable, no skullduggery. And then I suspect Paul Kimmage's face suggested something, because Russell says, you're annoyed now. No, not at all. Here's a list published, though, in the Daily Mirror 2 years after you turned pro. 6 years of drugs, scandals, scams and fake sheiks. So don't tell me it doesn't happen. Davy Russell says, yeah, well, going by that, Paul Kimmage, and it's still happening. Davy Russell, in brackets, writes Paul, exhales, shakes his head. So, look, there are other aspects around the sport where it's under attack a little bit. We might come to that. You know, the dominance of select owners and trainers. Animal welfare is a more pronounced issue with each passing year, especially in the UK, I feel. Doping has been talked about, or just as lucrative perhaps, throwing races, the extent of government financial support. There are all of these things chipping away at horse racing. But what about this exchange, Michael? Davy Russell, maybe it can happen, horses being held up, but nothing to see here.
There's a hell of a lot to see. It's just that it'll be the greatest investigation of all time, or the greatest reveal of all time, to actually get people on the record to say what actually happens. I'm a journalist in the parade ring, and what we're told is 20% of the real story. A lot of times there's another 80% that's a conversation between jockey and owner, jockey and trainer, trainer and owner. That's the real story. Like, you're given there about in Barry Brogan's book about, like, in inverted commas, excuses for a run. Like, I've heard of jockeys been, jocked up on the horse, and it's not today. The two most simple words, and it mightn't even be words. It might be a look, and it might be a nod, or it might be a wink. But a lot of the time, like, that's like, everybody knows that. The way the horse racing is run, the very definition of the system, it's, the vast majority of races that run are handicaps. Okay, so if you are well handicapped, in inverted commas, it means that you could have, a stone up your sleeve, or you could have 20 pounds up your sleeve, which means you have a better chance. If you run in your merits every day, and Dan will know this, if you run your merits every day, you will not be well handicapped. You will be in an area that makes it very, very difficult to win races. So trainers, maybe, and jockeys as well, they find, I would say, ways to be creative to make it seem like a horse is running on its merits, but it mightn't necessarily be it. Like Barney Curdy, the great gambler, a 2.5 mile horse. The horse that's a 2.5 miler, runs over 3 miles, fades in the last 2 furlongs, is beaten 80 lengths, or runs over 2 mile where he's, doesn't have the toe furred and is caught for speed, and again is beaten 20, 30 lengths, etc. There's ways and means around it. A 1 mile 4 horse running over 7 furlongs, we'll say. And listen, like, lads have been doing it for years. You'd see a 1 mile 4 handicap in Galway where the horse's previous 3 runs, you need 3 runs to get handicapped, are all over 7 furlongs to a mile. He steps up to 1 mile 4. As Fran Berry, the racing TV pundit, says, he improved for the application of cash. That's what happens a lot of time. But it's the very nature of the game. And listen, I part of me loves that part of the game.
Everyone within the game knows that. I think this is the weird thing. And see, racing probably is a little bit under siege in the last couple of years, and some of the things you've spoken about there, because I think if you're into the sport, and like, I love the sport, like, now we're into the winter time, the weekend I spend most of the time like watching the race, and I have the racing channels, I have it on all the time. And yet there's a language within the sport that people within the sport know. There's a code that people know. And
he was never put into the race.
Yeah, all this stuff, Like, there'll be races now in the next couple of weeks in Ireland, in maiden hurdles, where there'll be 20 horses in the race, and within like half a furlong there'll be 3 out front and 17 out the back, and everyone watching the race who knows racing is like, well, we know exactly what's going on here. Everyone knows what's going on here. But I think that you find yourself in a situation like this, maybe explaining it to people who aren't necessarily massive racing, and as it goes on. And I think the welfare piece has been a little bit like that. I think people are now a lot more alert to the welfare situation. I think sometimes people within racing are very pragmatic about it. You know, livestock can become dead stock, and it's very much, but it's not acceptable now. Like the lack of traceability of how that's been handled, and where people win the game sort of know what's happened. It's just not acceptable anymore. And it's interesting that like that chat between Paul and David Russell has gone down the road of something that I guess to a lot of people will listen to this and go, it's not acceptable, even though it's completely wrapped into the game. I mean, Davy Russell, he said he's never stopped a horse in his life. I mean, we can only take him on his word in that. But I guess in some respects, he is one of the top jockeys. I know Johnny Ward at one time telling me that he spoke to a journeyman jockey about the possibility of maybe, would you do a book or something, that they couldn't do it because 80% of their mounts were stopping jobs. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing you will see, and this is the thing, this is the code of the racetrack. We might go at Christmas to Leopardstown or wherever it might be, we'll look at a horse and we'll see, oh God, Paul Townend's up today. You know, the previous 3 times it's been a lower grade jockey or a young jockey, and you're like, well, we know what's going on here. But that's wrapped in to the code of the game, and yet obviously when you put it into an external audience, like, well, actually, you know, and then you step back and you go, well, hang on, I mean, you'll have betting on pre-season GAA games. I know they're getting rid of them now, or like pre-season football matches, or a League Cup match where you know that you're not going to see, you know, Manchester United on the merits or Man City on the merits. And there's an element of, like, horses aren't robots, like they want to peak for Cheltenham. I understand, but like there was one race, I'm not going to say what it is, but there was a race over the weekend involving, you know, well enough known sort of horses, and it was a complete joke.
Why?
And everyone watching it would know it was a complete joke because the betting on a horse drifted considerably before the race, like a very good horse, and you're kind of watching the horse over the first couple of fences and you're like, well, I can understand why the betting was drifted. And you know, before the race starts, you know you're done. You should know you're done.
When you say that, like, everybody knows, but for that to be work, there needs to be people who aren't in the know.
That's very true. Well, some people might look at it and go, well, maybe, you know, how does an exchange work? You know, I guess, you know, people are backing one way and not backing the other. I get it. Some people in good faith might look at the form and think, well, actually, this horse shouldn't be this price. You know, you know, there's an element of unfortunately, like, the people who are involved in the game will know how to track the moves, and they will know what that means, but obviously other people.
And would the TV coverage ever be as explicit, for instance, as saying this horse today, good horse, based on the fact that jockey's on it and they've got this race in 4 weeks' time, everybody at home, wink and a nod, wouldn't go near it?
Look, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the TV coverage. I'm being a hypocrite, but I'm not. Like, Michael's reporting on it, I'm not reporting on it. So I'm sort of just watching it almost as it's an engagement I have as a fan with something, you know, with sport, and very rarely have that, like racing and golf maybe. The TV coverage to me, look, it's massively compromised. I mean, look, a lot of the TV coverage is pundits who are involved with stables. You'll have presenters who are agents of jockeys. And
sponsored by betting companies.
When it comes to a debate of issues around some of the matters that have affected the sport in recent years, and some of the stuff Paul has written about the Times, the debates on those platforms on issues like that are a complete waste of time. Now, when it comes to, say, you know, around to like Cheltenham and Aintree and like the form of and I'm still interested in that, well then yeah, I'll listen to what some people have to say and it can be good. But when it comes to stuff like that, no. And again, part of me understands it. Like, you talk about the Omerta that Davy Russell speaks about, like, they have gone to work. You know, they've sat in a weighing room with people who've died. You know, they're out there with jockeys who are, you know, it is a sport where people like put their life on the line. And there is an element of, I can understand why they will turn in and look after each other, and where that siege sort of, not that siege mentality, but it's a sort of a version of that where it comes from. Even the Davy Russell extracts at the weekend speaks about, like, you know, taking a punch from, or giving Danny Mullins a punch, and they go into the weight room afterwards, and Danny Mullins just, that didn't happen.
But even
there's an element of, like,
it's a story about Ruby Walsh and,
yeah,
you know, going into the steward's inquiry afterwards, and like the last thing he's going to do is, you know, throw Ruby Walsh under a bus.
When in theory, the result of that inquiry may be relevant to the result of a race that people have had a bet, you know, have a bet on.
Are you two, as owners, indulging in this practice?
Indulging in what practice, Joe?
See, Omerta.
No,
I'm not involved at the moment, so I'm
just
I'm
on the Omerta.
I wish I had the luxury sometimes.
Can I-
Sometimes you might see your horse 100 lengths behind and go, well, must be getting ready for the next day, and then you realise the next
Dan's
day
horse trying
you're
his
still
best.
100 lengths behind. I mean, I had a jockey who came in one day. This was the ultimate moment. People talk about sort of non-triers and all this. Like the jockey came in one day. It's like, yeah, the horse didn't try today. It's like, well, this is an issue. And then that horse left us and then went and won like 7 or 8 times for different connections. So it's not always as straightforward as you
But
might
Michael,
think.
I presume, so the way you're talking about it, you don't see a great issue with it. This is just the way business is done. It's baked into the nature of the sport. So you'd
Oh no, there is an issue with it. There definitely is an issue with it.
you'd partake in the behaviour.
But I can see both sides of it,
Yeah.
because like I love the idea of a coup. The only way you land a coup is if you have a heap of information that is not freely available to everybody else, and like that's what Dan is saying, even about say Paul Townend been jocked up on this horse. We think we know the story, but we don't really.
Mightn't be the
We don't
case,
know
of
if that
course.
horse is been gunning that day. We don't know if he's missed a couple of days work that week. We don't know if this is a pipe opener for 6 weeks down the line. We really don't have a clue. That's what I'm saying about having like 20-30% of the actual intel.
But so would the majority of owners, let's just big or small, would they be throwing several races in a bid to having a big payday betting wise in a few months?
Throwing is
suggests that they have the power to win.
Yeah.
It's more a case of preparing your horse to run under its optimum conditions on a particular day, and then by its nature, there are just horses who can't win particular races, and the more above board way of doing it is running a horse over a wrong trip, or again, it's very natural, 60% fit, and then you can equate that to other codes or sports. You know, watching the game, as I said, well, they're not 100% fit at the moment, but it's a game.
Yeah.
There's betting available on it. So
is it unethical if Michael runs his horse over 7 furlongs, knowing that 1-4 is his best, and then you in 2-3 races time you spring him?
Well, I put it to you this way, right? Say Rashida Adlecki is a 400 metre runner. She runs a 100 metre race. That's not like she's trying to win the race, but it's for a speed purpose. It's to help her in a
But if
a
she
bigger
puts
kind of
if
scheme.
she only puts a bet on herself when she eventually runs the 400 metres,
This is the
if
problem.
she pulls up after 50, it's a bit of an issue.
This is the problem. Like it's mentioned in the interview, and without putting Dan more of his finances on the spot. Like when you talk about watching racing for a day, do you do that without betting?
I would do both.
do
Yeah,
both?
I would do both. Yeah, no, I would be genuine fan, and if I have it on, I'd sort of sometimes have a small bet just to maybe for a bit of interest to watch a race. But equally, over the winter I'll listen to a lot of stuff about races, and of course there's a financial angle to it. The sport exists.
Exists.
Around
It's
it.
entwined with it in a way
can't
that
get away from
but it must be
Yeah.
sickening if you've a bet on a horse and 2 minutes in you say, no.
Yeah, no, of course it is. But then you probably would, if you follow the sport enough, you might berate yourself for going, just how did I not see that?
Right.
But this is why it's more of an issue, I think, and growing issue as well, because gambling has become a different.
Yeah, I
beast
think
as
that's
well,
so relevant.
Right,
and
okay. So there's suckers out there who aren't in on this.
there's a load of people now, and they're looking, and this isn't, and there are lots of different sports where this applies to, where there are far more content than anyone could reasonably find meaningful in any way, whether it's tennis, cricket, so many sports where
podcasts.
whether it's just is a tennis player really going to be trying as hard in some competition? But there's thousands of mug punters,
Spot betting and snooker issues.
but
there,
it's funny when you mention when you talk about a coup or whatever like that. I think about something like cricket, where any information that was you would be thrown out of the game, because now cricket has had a huge gambling or betting problems.
Yeah.
And match fixing problems, but you would be just driven from the game if anything became known that something like that was taking place. So
I feel like the ties are so much closer in gambling, the gambling industry and horse racing.
well, they are, they're huge. Because I was looking at a piece. There was that the gambling bill is obviously going, has been passed now, and the way horse racing is responding to that is kind of they can't really make up their mind whether it's we're not part of the problem, or this is going to be very bad for us. You know what I mean? So obviously there's the ban on advertising and all that kind of stuff. But then they're saying, well, actually, problem gambling exists it's not our type of gambling that problem gambling is a part of. Yet Paul Hensey, the AIR chief executive, said putting forward a separate Irish channel may be a solution in some regards, but I don't think it would be a good thing for us to be separate from good meetings in the UK. any research we've done on betting turnover, it's a benefit to be coming in on the heels of big races across the water, and people will roll on the money. So, like, you know, because other, you know, in this article I read, it's a few weeks old now, but there was like, you know, well, we're not the problem with gambling. Problem gamblers go to whatever it is, you know, jackpots or all the
slot machines,
all that kind of stuff. Which is, you know, I think they go everywhere. But equally, it's like, you know, we exist. Betting is a huge part of the, as you said, the reason for racing existing, and that is an issue.
Yeah.
And that becomes more and more of an issue when you say to people, well, you're betting on something that isn't real. And when there was a time when, like, there may have been a few mugs who weren't in on the secret. Now, like, everything is broadcast. Everything, anyone can bet on anything. It's not just somebody at a track.
Yeah.
When again, there's that great romance, you know, and it was a kind of romantic idea of going to a race meeting and betting on something and knowing what's happening, and like that is a kind of there's a glorious kind of romantic kind of decadence to that, which isn't part of the huge kind of gambling industry today.
Just at the higher end, Joe, at the higher end, like Grade 1 races, Group 1 races, like, it's far less skullduggery at that level.
Right.
'Cause the prize money is so high. Like, you're talking about stud fees and stallion fees and the value of a mare or a filly going forward. It's when you get lower down the grades, like really bad midweek racing in far-flung regions within, you know, this island and within the British Isles as well. And as well as that, as well as when you're landing a touch or landing a gamble, it can't be blatant. Like, you know, Ronan McNally got a very, very severe fine, and his training licence was taken off him because it was almost seen like he was rubbing their noses in it. Like, it looked so blatant. Now, I have issues with that.
Probably wasn't well connected enough.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of it as well. There are certain colours where within, you know, the British Isles where their horses can do anything and they're almost untouchable.
Because they're such powerful figures.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Can I broaden this out into sort of a State of the Nation point, which weirdly, of all people, Pat Spillane manages to capture a certain perspective on issues with racing, and you can give me your thoughts. So he wrote this piece off the back of the Dublin Racing Festival last year, I think. So he was talking about the 2-day Dublin Racing Festival, which, by the way, on the face of it, has become a great success.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's kind of Cheltenham Light almost, isn't it? So he writes in the Sunday World, all of the sports cheerleaders on radio and television were wheeled out to egg it on. There wasn't an iota of negativity in any remarks. Yet on so many levels, the festival reinforced the inequalities that plague the sport. Over €2 million was handed out in prize money, but only the elite benefited. And as for the small trainer getting a look in, don't make me laugh. On day one, for example, Willie Mullins had 4 runners out of 7 in one race, 5 out of 8 in another, and 6 out of 8 in a third. 7 of the 8 winners on day 2 were trained by either Mullins or Gordon Elliott. Last year, the taxpayer forked out €42 million in prize money. Taxpayer, €42 million in prize money for horse racing. And he points out, horse race owners don't have to pay tax on the prize money. You couldn't make it up. The hard-pressed Irish taxpayers handing over soft money to millionaires, billionaires and Arab sheikhs. Government is funding horse racing in Ireland to the tune of 72 million, and the greyhound industry gets 18. And so he's sort of saying, what is going on here? You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, like I've written about this issue, like with the betting tax money, the horse and greyhound fund, which, like,
is that the bulk of that 72 million?
Oh yeah, that's that, like, it's, and it was sort of the 2023 24 version was signed off recently. It's actually gone up in the recent budget because it's sort of defined. It's placed under the remit of agriculture, and again, like, racing probably is under siege in so many ways that, like, you probably write about that subject, and it came from the FAI submitting a paper around it, and again, there's a massive sort of defensive response to it, you know, and from people within the sport who, again, you'll have these Deloitte reports which are has been put out, which talk about the economic value that racing brings to the Irish economy, which is look, there's holes in those figures, but I mean, the basic fact, you know, you can argue it. The greyhound aspect is really a lot more contentious because you know, the sport, even attendances and so on.
I think people have a big problem with taxpayer forking out 42 million in prize money when the majority of owners do not need that prize money?
Well, yeah, I know. Maybe Michael come in. Like there would be an argument that some of this money is needed, for programs and stuff within the game. But I do think it's a dubious one, And I think the bigger point about the Horse and Greyhound Fund is that, like, this has existed for over 20 years. That over $1 billion has been put in at that time. Why does the sport then remain so reliant on this funding? Look, why hasn't it developed an area of an element of sort of self-sufficiency?
Yeah. If it is the great industry
which is a massive point, and clearly, right, there's big entities are turning around millions, and it must be said that a lot of owners at the top end, they're not going into it. They're happy to almost to make a loss,
and they are making.
They are making a loss. So it's for them, it's a recreational activity.
Fair point.
But it's that area of. It's a really strange one that they've never really reviewed this fund and the efficiency of it. And I wrote about it, and you get a lot of aggressive sort of feedback from people within it who are like, well, and it just becomes an element of what about it, are you about it? And I said, I'm torn in it because I love the sport and I love watching it, but equally, how can you stand over it? And it's very clear. There's various levels of documentation. There is a relationship between the betting tax and the funding of those, even though it's not laid down directly on paper, but it's clear there's enough stuff has been said. Davy Russell himself recently suggested that the betting tax should go up to benefit racing, effectively. So, they're not afraid to lobby and fight. And maybe Pat Spillane point is that, it's very well organised, but probably because they feel like maybe in some ways the end might be in sight.
Well, give us a final word, Michael, and we'll move on. I mean, and that's not to mention the animal welfare issue, which I think with each passing year becomes bigger, and there's yet another primetime documentary. And I think in the UK that lobby is even louder. You can almost see I sense a paranoia on ITV's coverage every time there's a foaler. They falling over themselves to say, horse is okay, horse is okay.
They're pandering to it big time.
Big time, but they're feeling that pressure.
Grand National, you would have watched it.
Oh, they've met it.
Like what a race, the drama of it all. Yeah, and that was a lot to do with the height of the fences, how much of a challenge it was. Whereas you could have a pint-sized chaser now, like a really small chaser that would get around Aintree, absolutely no problem, like Tiger Roll basically in the last couple of years. So they've really, really pander to that, and even with whip bands and things like that. There was a big race taken off a horse called Alfonso Legrand there a couple of weeks ago for I think it was a couple of 100,000 prize money basically taken off him for overuse of the whip, and jockey was disqualified, Jamie Powell, for 28 days. But just on a point that Pat made there, the big stables are really, really dominating now. Like you have Willie Mullins, Gordon Elliott, Henry de Bromhead, Gavin Cromwell's after coming into that mix as well. And they're winning the vast majority. Below that, there are a hell of a lot of trainers struggling, and not that many new trainers coming to the scene that are making it profitable. A lot of them are turning a buck to keep them going from week to week, and that's basically it. And it's more of a lifestyle and an enjoyable lifestyle that they love. It's been profitable. It's not profitable for the vast majority. The 4 or 5 at the top in the National Hunt game, and we'll say Aidan O'Brien, Joseph O'Brien and a couple more in the flat game, are the ones that have a stranglehold over it. And that has an effect on, I would say, spectatorship, viewership, interest. Even when I'm writing on something, if it's just the Willie Mullins monopoly again, you're looking at a different angle. You're trying to find a different jockey, a different owner. You want the different stories. You want the Denolis. You want the Doran's Prides. That's what I was, beef or salmon, that's what I was brought up on. These real interesting stories. Michael Horrigan down in Rathkeil there, training, a handful of horses or whatever, isn't coming across this gem. But they're becoming less and less likely. And it's a money thing really, because the money that's been paid for National Hunt horses in particular, coming from the point-to-point field now, basically horses running around in a muddy field, you're talking about 300, 400, 500,000, and they're staying generally within the same stables and within the same ownership. But just on a point that Pat made, owners and all these billionaire and millionaire owners are not making money out of race.
Okay.
Absolutely zero chance. Because for every one of those horses winning a Grade 1 that's winning the 200,000 or whatever, there's another 5 that maybe haven't been able to win a maiden hurdle, and they've made a 200,000 or 300,000 loss on them.
Fair point. It's good to have that conversation with two people who love their horse racing, because often that doesn't happen in these panel discussions. Before we wrap up, we should just mark your card for Friday. So it's been announced RTE are going to show Shelbourne Derry City on RTE2 on Friday night, and then Shamrock Rovers Waterford will go out on the RTE News channel. So obviously if Shells drop points, Rovers are poised. And both games are on the RTE player. I was just thinking, Dion, that must be unprecedented. I don't think there's ever been 2 matches simultaneously broadcast from the League of Ireland, a finale. This is an unprecedented title race in so many ways.
It's extraordinary, and I was away at the weekend, and you find yourself checking, just it's even for somebody who isn't a regular League of Ireland attender, you find
Straight onto live score. What happened?
Yeah, and then see
I see a video of you and the Rovers.
I was at the
Rovers. The penalty being missed.
There, yeah. I was at the Champions League game.
Yeah,
which was a fantastic. But we were there with about 5 kids who were about 9 and 10. And we were like, we can't go to extra time. We need to get this match to end. So
that was particularly unlucky. Yeah.
I would go more. I would go more. With my son, if when he gets a bit older, I think at the moment Friday night games aren't what you're going to bring a 10-year-old to.
Yeah.
When he's playing football first thing in the morning, but it is gripping, and it is exactly what the sport needs and what Irish football needs to have, and to have a personality like Duff involved in it, and for Rovers, I think you couldn't frame it better in terms of it being the dominant club versus like the dominant personality.
Yeah.
Joe, I have a minimal interest in League of Ireland football, and maybe it's different for people who are dealing with these characters day on day and hearing whatever. But the whole Duff thing has totally drawn me in. Like I might be watching on Friday night, but I'll definitely be updating Twitter or seeing what's going on, because I just find it fascinating. I think he's a fascinating figure as well. I think what did he say that a League of Ireland medal would mean more than any.
I have it here in keeping with his the greatest marketeer in the world. So he says, I have some nice memories, winning trophies, playing some good stuff, 100 caps for Ireland, blah blah blah.
I know, yeah. It was in the interview when he said it, yeah.
Never has anyone said 100 caps for Ireland, blah blah blah, but that is his want. Winning the title would be the absolute pinnacle for me. It blows everything else out of the water. And to be fair, like he expands on why, and it's perfectly understandable. And I would say he's been completely genuine. He says, managing Shelbourne has been the greatest 3 years of my life. Football was easy to me. And talked about, played at a high level, was easy to me. Management has been uncomfortable. I'm creating an environment, I'm creating a club, I'm getting everybody together in the same direction. Maybe I've surprised myself. It's the hardest thing I've done in my life. That's why it's so pleasant and so enjoyable. And then it was put to him about RTE showing both games and just the interest in the finale on Friday. I love it. I know you all think I'm giving you ear candy, but I love it.
You're doing both. He's doing both.
It is interesting. Like I think it's me and Verney have spoken at this before. I've heard you speak about it before. Like someone is, you're from Offaly, you're from not from. Like, I couldn't be any further away from Hurling man. They couldn't be any further away from the demographic. But yet, like I know it. Like in here, like the readership for like Damien Duff stories is like. It's really, really good.
Like you're buying a new horse on the back of it.
Well, like, as I said, like it will compare favourably with anything else we discuss in football, like Premier League or whatever. The traffic generated by Duff this year will be above it. Like it genuinely would.
I don't think there's a Saturday morning that I haven't clicked into the Damien Duff story from the night before.
And why are you entertained by him? Like I actually find that a lot of people who are from GA background, even they love reading about Duff. And is it sometimes has this old school blunt honesty that might remind people of the Gaelic football managers you grew up listening to or something. It's
you've summed it up right there. It's very like so he's gone to Shelbourne, and it's like he could have 5 All-Ireland medals, but if he wins with his club, a county title with his club, that will mean more. And you can just feel the kind of raw kind of passion. I love it, Jen. I'd be the same as you, Joe. I love clicking watch the video of his interview, because I've probably read a piece on the back of it and be like, oh, I want to see what that actually looks like, how he said it. And it's just, it's kind of the rawness of it all and the brutal honesty of it all, because we probably don't get that across a lot of sports anymore.
I think there's an authenticity about him, even though when he's saying things that might be ear candy or might not, there might be more nuance to it than, this is going to be the greatest achievement of his career, although I'm sure he believes it as he's saying it. But the thing about it, and I was just saying, as we were sitting here, I hadn't thought about this. I was like, I've been doing, I haven't seen him a long time, but I've been doing stuff with Damien Duff for 25 years. And I used to got on well with him, but he was impossible. Like I remember him literally running across a hotel lobby to stop saying, to avoid saying hello to me in Zagreb, like 1990, like just seeing me, knowing that, we'd had a couple of chats, we might be doing, and he just ran. Like, I don't want to talk to, I don't want to talk to the media. But then whenever you talk to him, even just private, like even just had a phone call, he was so funny and so genuine that, like, as he rose and as he went through the ranks and as he achieved, he was one of those players that you couldn't but wish, like, you just became a fan watching, not just of his skill, but because of who he was and what he brought to it. And there was an authenticity as he rose as a player. And that has remained as a manager. Even though there are times you think, right, this is a little bit, there's a little bit of not self-promotion, but there's a little bit of artifice around this, or there's a little bit of grandstanding around what he's saying here. There is, at the heart of it, there is an authentic person, and I think because he is such a superstar who achieved so much, and now he's doing it, and he's in the League of Ireland doing it and bringing his celebrity to a platform which is, and it's doing great, but it's still short on celebrity, and he's bringing that to it in a very genuine way that isn't about his celebrity at all, if you know what I mean. It's about he's invested in it as a worker, and the same way he invested in everything as a footballer. He devoted himself to being a footballer, and he's devoted himself to this. And I think that genuineness has been a constant. I think that's might be one of the reasons why he appeals to people.
With the view to Derry on Friday night, they're obviously out of contention now. Has the air completely gone out of their tyre, or will the fact that this is live on TV, could be the most watched game of the season, will stopping Shelbourne win be any kind of motivation, or relations so-so between the two?
I don't know. I think the bigger issue with Derry is that they're in an FAI Cup final 9 days later, and they can, as it stands, they can still finish in the top 3 and qualify for Europe automatically. But I think the psychology around Derry is very relevant this week. That I don't know if some people at the club are going to be there next year. So are they going to be that motivated by qualifying for Europe next year? It's more about, they are playing in the cup final, which is, I think there's over 30,000 tickets sold, even though it's maybe not a glamour final like some of the more recent ones, Derry and Drogheda. They play on a terrible pitch, which is a health hazard. And I think if you're a manager who's missing 1 or 2 players, and Rory Higgins, are you going to lose more for the sake of this? So I don't know. Relations are, it's a small league, everyone knows everyone. What is the best outcome? It's a strange one, because I know Eamon Sweeney was writing about it on Monday that it's been a great season. It's been so much fun. It's genuinely been so much fun. The last time me and Dion were talking about the international team, and we're kind of downbeat, but the league beat this year has just been great crack. A lot of the time, there's always been something happening. But it would be a strange thing if it ended up just with Shamrock Rovers winning it, the confirmation of the football at so many levels of the game. You look around Europe, it's a team winning a league 5, 6, 7 times in a row. They've been good in Europe, they're well set up. If they win, it may well be, it's possible that this could be the Shell's only chance to do it, and to maybe move to give them a chance at the group stage football next year. And it just feels like there's a lot riding on it. But I think the Derry aspect is an interesting one, because this game doesn't mean the world to them. It means the world to Shelbourne. But there's pressure that comes with that. Too. But no, it's going to be a good week. And I think there's no doubt you can't get away from the power of Duff's personality. And I think the fact as well that so often in our discussions about football, and maybe that's even my fatigue with the United thing or whatever, it's just obscene, it's the finances, the money, and you have someone doing something that he actually doesn't need the money. He's so different to everyone else working within the league, other rival managers and stuff who very understandably haven't made big money in their careers. They see management as their platform to maybe get to a place, to see what Stephen Kenny did, and maybe this could be, you can get to this level in this sort of stage of your life that you couldn't as a player. Stephen Bradley personally is a real fascinating origin story. I know he turns 40 in a couple of weeks, and he's done incredible things, and yet Duff is so captivating because he doesn't need to be actually doing this.
No, Duff's down the road saying, I don't even know how much I get paid.
Yeah,
jeez, don't say that.
Which can probably wind people up in a
absolutely
way. But you think of some other great figures in Irish football who've been, Roy Keane's been as an assistant manager, earning crazy money for an assistant manager. And look, that's what he was paid. that was the power of what he could bring. But like Duff is sort of giving something back now,
Yeah.
which is something that, and it has energised the game here in a way that I didn't think it was possible.
No, it's unprecedented. It is unprecedented.
On the Derry point, Joe, I can remember when we played under 14 soccer, we were out of league. Killy came to Burtown, last game of the year. Killy needed to win the league. And I still remember it now. And we won trophies. But one of the greatest achievements was keeping them to a 1-1 draw and denying them the league title. Stopping somebody else.
Those games take on a quality.
There's something about.
But if you've been beaten by Shamrock Rovers for the last 3-4 years, do you want to be creating their celebration?
The whole country's watching this match.
No, I know. Yeah.
But it's also whether it's easier to play with no pressure or with the pressure that Shells have on them. Like
we played a double sweeper that day and played 4 across the back in front of that. The manager was like, "We are not letting them win the league." I love it.
But the mad thing is that Derry will feel like that they're a better side than Shelbourne, and that's like Shells were 25-1 pre-season.
Yeah,
they should not be winning this league.
No.
Like this just doesn't happen. I mean, people Leicester City or whatever. Like it doesn't really happen. Like in football, money is king. The biggest budget wins, and that's why the story would be incredible. But there's all these psychological angles that you can speak about, which just make it very interesting. Yeah.
We got to go, Michael. I know you're writing about Doon winning their first ever Limerick senior hurling title in the paper today, and the scenes are actually amazing. Conor had a great start from outside. So you take the All Ireland finals last year. Hurling football. The 4 teams who got to the finals last year, all of them out of the championship already, which is an interesting.
Oh, it's deadly. There's been a load of, like, Thomastown won the Kilkenny title for the first time in 78 years. Doon won their first ever one. Fecal won yesterday. There was bonfires down in East Clare, their first one in 36 years since Derlock Nam was a veteran player.
Right.
There's a load of new faces on the scene. Ballygunner are probably the one constant across the hurling, but there's a load of new faces and it brings a bit of a lottery.
It's funny though, I think for the national audience to get interested in the latter stages, you want some familiarity. It doesn't hurt,
Yeah, well, like people will be building up to a Ballyhale against a Ballygunner for months and saying, if they win their next 3 games and they win their next 4, they're going to meet here, and there's a rivalry over the last couple of years. There's probably not the rivalries this year, but this is the start. This is the genesis of maybe new rivalries.
No, it's true.
Some freshness to it.
Come here, I'm reading Richie Hogan's book. He's coming into studio on Friday. One Michael Verney gets a mention.
Yeah, I actually read the reference because... it's funny. I see it.
Did you coach yourself in the index?
I see it. No, I didn't actually. Someone said
friends.
Someone sent it to me. That's the great manager lines. Like someone sent it to me.
I got sent a screenshot.
In his defence, there is no index.
To be fair, the ghostwriter sent it to me because I asked him for it.
And he mentioned me in the book. Is that?
Well, I said he surely mentioned his debut or whatever, and he had a really difficult debut because
against Offaly.
Yeah, he was thrown in with
marked by Michael Verney.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, he says in the book that his first touch was off and he didn't do this. I just remember just wrestling with him for an hour. Genuinely, really funny.
Yeah. Because that was his debut for Kilkenny. And look, Richie Hogan's one of the greatest hurlers in the history of the game, and he basically, Cody being Cody, he didn't play well against Michael Verney, and he didn't play for the rest of that year. That's how Cody operated. So obviously you showed him what's what. I think is what I'm saying. It's
mad because he was very young, real exciting talent or whatever, but he was coming into a really, really seasoned team. He didn't play championship or start championship for about 2.5 years after that.
No, he says that Offaly game. Now he doesn't put it all down to you, but he says that Offaly game.
See, I put it down to me. He puts more down to himself.
I just thought he was like a horse. He was warming up for a bigger day. He actually just wasn't trying. No. He wasn't off a yard.
That did him no harm from the point of view of he was probably going in very, very young, probably 19 at the time.
Yes, he would have been.
Like a fairly big setback straight away. And then when he got his chance, maybe 2011 onwards, like he was a constant thereafter. Yeah. And it's funny how sports people remember an early setback. And an early setback is no harm because it probably teaches them that, okay, it's not as easy as it was at underage level and I need to step up to the mark more. And then a couple of years later, he obviously did.
In the vast majority of matches, he doesn't mention who was marking him. So I just thought it was interesting. He played Offaly. I was marked by Michael Verney.
Yeah. Now, see, what he didn't say as well is who he knew well from his underage career. Like, he tortured me at minor. Tortured me.
Oh, he didn't put that in the book?
Tortured me.
Yeah, because he said, I was marked by Michael Verney, who I knew, who I'd played against before.
Yeah, no, he tortured me at minor. He threw a dummy hand pass, and I bought it, and he ended up going for a hot dog, and he was just straight through on goal. And then 2 years later, I marked him in a college's final, and he doesn't know the background to this, obviously, but I had it in my head like that I had to get even with him or whatever, but I was brutally sick about 10 days out with a chest infection, but I ended up on the good stuff like to build myself back up, like the real good stuff, like to get myself back right. And
I'm not going to
Just the
ask.
good stuff, the real
good stuff. And
I feel like
I feel like we're just going to go back to the
going
horse
back to the horses again. Yeah.
the problem was he had won three.
Waterford Crystals, Verney, they call
won
them.
3 scored at this stage, and he went to throw the dummy hand pass again.
Yeah.
And I was on a yellow, and I absolutely nailed him now. Like nailed him. He was carted off. He ended ask him. I think he ended up in hospital for a couple of days after because I had this,
That was the real good stuff.
because I had this superhuman strength about me. But they ended up winning the game, obviously. So
Yeah.
that's my memory I'll take
listen.
from it.
Very
What
good.
is the good stuff? Sorry.
And we're not asking on the record. We are done. Dion Fanning, the Free State Podcast. Dion, thank you so much.
Show.
Michael Verney, on the good stuff. Thank you, Michael.
Unfortunately, not anymore.
Dan McDonnell, football correspondent with the Irish Independent. Hey, enjoy this week. Centre stage, Irish football.
That'd be good.
Be good, yeah. That's us done.
Good stuff, lads.
Thanks, fellas. That's great.